Hello. Thank you for joining us. I would like to talk to you tonight about fear. A common fear that I feel that is shared amongst most everyone, whether it be because the thing I'm about to talk about is a seldomly visited area, or maybe it's the lack of windows, but I feel that it is a very common thing to experience a fear of the basement. I want to tell you about one specific day when I went down to my basement. Something tells me that it knew that this was a good day to strike. I I had to visit my basement one day to shut off some power. I was going to be doing some electrical work, and like most houses, my main circuit box was in the basement, well, is in the basement. And I decided to run down there, shut the power off to pretty much everything, and then run back up. Or at least that was the plan. When I descended the stairs, something, always seems kind of dim and dreary, the shadows playing against the walls, the lights not seeming to illuminate as much as they should, as if something specific about the basement causes it to be dark and dreary. I reached for my electric box some 20-30 feet from the base of the stairs and brushed against some spider webs that had formed since the last time I had been in the basement, and flipped the switch, and the power turned out. This includes the lights in the basement. So now I'm feeling my way back to the bottom of the stairway, the only source of light coming from the open doorway at the top of the stairs. And as I reach the stairways, I notice that the light is getting a little dimmer. My heart sinks slightly. I can feel the blood draining out of my face. Prickles are going up my back. What do I see but the only sliver of light swiftly vanishing like the hope in my heart? Jumping into motion only seemed to encourage the swinging door to shut more adamantly as the fear of being entrapped in my terror crawled up my spine. Not even halfway up my flight, the door to my tomb slid quietly shut. And as quiet as only one other thing could possibly be, the dead.
Ooh, chills. Well, mine is not quite as deeply chilling as that, but I have a ghost story for you as well. So, a man is walking alone towards his home one dark and windy night. His path took him down a dark and deserted street that ran right by a local cemetery. As he passed the gates, he heard a strange noise in the darkness behind him. Not daring to look back, he quickened his pace, and the bumping noise continued behind him. He stopped and turned to see what it was. Coming down the road behind him was a coffin, standing on end, bumping from side to side. Bump, bump, bump. The man couldn't believe his eyes. So terrified, he turns and runs away into a driving rainstorm. Behind him, the coffin comes faster. Bump, 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 bump. Ahead of him, there's a branch from a fallen tree, and he reaches down and grabs it as he runs by, and he turns and throws it at the coffin. But it just splintered, and the coffin continues to chase him. Bumpity, bumpity, bumpity. The man turned the corner onto his street and ran through the front gate, and the coffin right behind him. The man dashed into his house, but the coffin crashed through the front door, and the front of the coffin swings open, and the man glimpsed the horrible sight of the dead skeleton inside. He ran upstairs and grabbed a shotgun off the wall, took aim, and bam! blasted the coffin with both barrels, but the shot just bounced harmlessly off the coffin as it continued up the stairs. Boom, clop, boom, clop, boom, clop. The man, desperate and scared to death, jumped into the bathroom and locked the door, but he knew it would do no good. The coffin banged against the door, and suddenly the door exploded and the coffin came through. In desperation, the man reached out his hand and grabbed the first thing he could. It was a bottle of cough syrup. He threw it at the coffin, and the coffin stopped.
Ha!
Thought we'd get a little light before we got a little creepy.
Yeah, no kidding. Mine actually happened, though.
And with that, welcome to this episode of the 800's. I hope you enjoyed our spooky ghost stories, whether it be my funny one, your co-host Alex, or from my lovely or the creepy one from my lovely co-host Adam. Well done, by the way.
Yep.
All right, so why don't we get right into our plugs then?
Yeah, if you
thanks Alan geez, I'm sorry, buddy. Go ahead. Whoops.
Thanks Alan for all your technical support and keeping the show alive. If you joined us before our spooky stories, you probably heard some music. That music is Fearless First. That's from Incompetech. We love Incompetech for all of our musical needs. You should check them out too, because they got super awesome scores and thematic elements that will add a certain flavor to your musical needs today. Check them out at incompetech.filmmusic.io. Also, I want to talk briefly about our Patreon. Patreon is how we determine what book we're going to read next. If you join our Patreon for just like $2 or something a month, you get to tell us what to read. And what cooler power could there be than that? The link to Patreon is below the video. Also, I personally listen to books on audio. I don't usually read books, not necessarily because I don't like to, but because I'm a busy person. Everybody these days are just super busy, and audiobooks just make a lot more sense because you can listen to them while you're doing chores. You listen to them while you're driving to and from work. You can listen to them while you're ignoring your other times too. Anyway, if you want a free trial for Audible, go to dmstable.com/audible and check it out. I think that's all for now.
All right. This week on the 800's, we will be discussing our second book in our spooktacular horror month, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Gather around the campfire, kids, as Shirley tells us a ghost story of the infamous and eponymous Hill House. We join Eleanor Vance, a young woman with alleged psychic abilities, as she teams up with a parapsychologist, a bohemian artist, and the heir to Hill House itself to determine if the paranormal claims regarding the house are true. All seems well in their investigation at first, but what happens when the house investigates back?
Almost as chilling as the real story. If this is your first time joining us tonight, I'll give you a quick rundown of how things work. Alex and I will pitch a topic to discuss or a question to answer. We're looking for each other's answers as well as anybody in the chat to answer the question as well. And also where that topic or question can come from is either from our own minds or the chat. If you have something you want to talk about, don't be afraid to pop it up in the chat. Even if it's kind of out of the stream of conversation, we'll try and scoop it up and throw it out there for everybody to chat about. So yeah, but otherwise, while we're waiting for your guys' comments to come in, we'll talk about what we think about whatever topic or question is posted, and then we'll throw it over to any comments that were particularly stand out-ish while we were talking. That's pretty much it.
And our usual gentle reminder that this is not necessarily a kid's show. We cover adult topics and stuff, and while we try not to swear all the time, it does happen, and so let kids join at your own discretion, I suppose. Also, we're trying to create a fun and supportive community over here at DM's Table, where people can share their interests without any fear of judgment or anything. So, in short, be nice or FUCK off. Fuck off.
Very well said. With that, let's get into the conversation. Start things off with our typical first question, which is, what were your initial thoughts on the book?
My initial thoughts were I was a little surprised at what this book was actually like, because it didn't really feel like most of the ghost stories that I had like read growing up. Not in a bad way, but like it wasn't what I expected going into it. Because we're used to a lot of horror nowadays being kind of in your face, I suppose. And it was a lot more subtle than that, which was an interesting read. But one thing I found is that this wasn't one that I could read distracted, because it was very easy to miss poignant moments if I did. So I actually had to like set aside time for that. But when I did, it was a much better read in general. And I thought, well, it wasn't what I expected. I thought it was really well done for a ghost story and earned its reputation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The start is kind of fumbly, right? Because it's like there's a house, there's a doctor, he's putting together a team. But I kind of I don't usually like what's it called when somebody's monologuing but there's nobody else there. So like I don't usually like it when stories self-monologue and they're like character talks to themselves, or it's just them thinking for a long period of time. But at the beginning, when Eleanor, well, I guess just monologue. Okay. When Eleanor is thinking about stuff while she's driving down to Hill House, internal monologue.
Yeah.
Maybe I like internal monologue because it was like her thoughts. But I really enjoyed the voice that came through, specifically with Eleanor, and how different it was than the voice of the writing when it was the doctor talking. So that part kind of drew me in and made me interested in the story, which helped me want to listen to it some more.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is the internal monologuing, or I think K-Rock got the right word, a soliloquy, and an act of speaking one's thoughts aloud, one by oneself, regardless of any hearers. So that would be the external times that she did that, because there are points where Eleanor does that aloud.
Yeah.
And there are times where it's internal, so it's a little bit of both. But yeah, those parts could be a little bit hard to get through. But one of the things I thought was interesting about them was how whimsical most of those thoughts were, which was, I think, setting that up to be subverted down the road, like kind of like lending a certain naivete to her, because it was all about imagining the world as it could be for herself. And
I definitely agree with that. I mean, in our little notes thing, after the first couple hours, I went Eleanor dash prone to fanciful imaginings. So...
Well, I think, yeah, and I think that that set her up to be the one, like, I mean, it, other than just being the protagonist, I thought that actually was a subtle way to set her up to be the one who winds up being taken in by whatever paranormal activity is going on, just to, because like when you look back at a lot of like ghost stories and stuff, who do they usually possess? Either the person who's supremely evil, or the person who's supremely innocent and naive. And there wasn't anybody, at least in the beginning of the book, who came off as supremely evil. So by process of elimination.
Yeah, definitely. Storm says, what was the mystery? I don't know if this book is necessarily a mystery book, more of a horror book. But if you want to spin it, the mystery that the doctor was trying to solve was, is there paranormal activity at Hill House, or is it scientifically explainable?
Yeah. What could be causing the phenomena? Is it paranormal or is it psychological? Which is, interesting that parapsychology seemed to have at least more of a legitimate foothold. Like, I don't know how true that was, because this book was written in like 1959, and I'm not sure how common a thing that was prior to now, but now that's not, like, pretty much, unless you're watching like Ghost Hunters or something.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something that you would typically see somebody with a doctorate going for.
Right.
Yeah, and Via Straight, good point. That's already an old show, let alone.
Is it? Is it though? I mean,
we're old. Just let it happen.
I do remember watching it in like high school,
Yeah,
slightly after high school, that kind of time. So that was about a decade ago. So
interesting. We've got a little conflict in the chat. VS Drake actually really liked how the women were written, and Stormy didn't care for the characters. Aside from I can't tell, Stormy, if you like the fact that the wife overshadowed the doctor. If Mrs. Montague overshadowed him, or if that was part of what you disliked. If you could maybe clarify, but that's a good question for us, Adam, is what did you think about the characters themselves?
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, pretty much all I wrote down to talk about tonight was characters. I felt like all the characters were clearly defined. They had very clear positives and negatives, right? Eleanor was sweet but naive. The doctor was analytical. Other things. I like, in terms of liking a character, there wasn't really anybody that screamed out to me like, "Oh, I really like this character. I think they're cool. If we were in real life, I wish they would be my friend." There was nothing like that. But I did like how each of them were written, if that makes sense.
I think it does, because I kind of feel the same way. This wasn't really much of a character development type of story, which we're typically used to seeing. This is about putting people, it's more like setting chess pieces than it was, at least in my opinion, than it was actually like making character development, because you needed certain people to fulfill certain aspects clearly but subtly, and I thought that was fairly well done. You've got your skeptic in the doctor, who has just enough belief to like make just enough belief and mixed skepticism and, for the time, social clout to make this happen. You have, obviously you have the potential victims, or what you would typically think of as the potential victims in Eleanor and Theodora, just people who are somehow attached to the story, and they're the ones that create the mystery of who's going to be the person who becomes the central focus of this haunting. Which we're primed for by the very name of the book,
Yeah.
And then you have the full-on believes every bit of it and forces you to believe in it in Mrs. Montague, and then you have the person who's tied to the history of the house in forget Luke, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like they all played a part, and I thought they did. I thought Shirley did a good job of writing them into those parts without shoehorning them into it. You know, because that can in ghost stories I've read before, it can feel really forced. You know, because they are somewhat formulaic for the most part, but you know, there's a way to do it that makes the story flow, that makes it feel earned, rather than just like this person had this characteristic and that makes them this person in the character. They were just there were little pieces that added up to that, like we talked about with Eleanor's daydreaming. The doctor did a good job of kind of splitting that skeptical mind with, you know, like a decent amount of knowledge about what things could be, and his role is to place not just the doubt in the minds of the other characters, but the doubt in our minds. You know, like things like, and I want to talk about this more later, like when he was talking about the architecture of the house itself. I want to get more into depth for that because I thought it was really cool. But like him putting those things out in the open, Luke having his connection to the house, what allowed us to know a little bit more about the history, or gave the doctor a reason to know the stuff that he exposed, and is that's what I liked about them. They weren't particularly complex or deep characters, but they didn't necessarily need to be.
Yeah. That's yeah, I think they each served, like, obviously the doctor called them there for a purpose, but they each served a specific purpose to move the story along.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good analogy about what you were talking about. Um, with like how they're not deep, but they're deep enough.
Yeah, they're deep enough to play their part, but they're not so deep that it pulls you away from the ghost story. Because what you want to settle in, you want to settle into, for a ghost story, you kind of need to settle into the scenery of it. Like even like what you did with your story, you did a lot of build up about going into your basement, what it felt like, what it was like to be there. You do have to be able to put yourself in the mindset of the person there, and that requires a good character. But you also don't want to be like, I want to see where this person goes and how they change, because that takes you out of the being in the moment. And I think V.S. Drake made a good point. Is it plays out a lot like a long form short story. So like all the compactness of a short story, but you know, just a little bit longer, so you can elaborate a little bit and get a little more time to suck people into it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and that's another good point, is that the V.S. Drake, is that the characters are foils to each other, which kind of creates just enough conflict and you know,
well,
to keep things moving.
let's talk about the character that was in the spotlight for the entire book. Who was, in your opinion, haunting Hill House?
Oh, okay. So that one, I am not sure. I mean, it's yeah, I had that same theory that V.S. Drake had at one point, is that it was like all the family members were like haunting different parts of the home. Like I think it was all of them, but they were haunting different parts of it. Like like whenever they heard what, like when they were speaking to the house with Miss Montague, I thought they were speaking to the child. Anytime they felt the cold, I don't know why, but I always imagined that being the woman. And then like the rattling, I assumed was the husband, but like that, I had that theory. It's real. I really, the way things played out, it felt a little bit more like the child was the most likely. I really don't know. I know his mom was there. That's actually one of the reasons one of the things that threw me the hell off. uh, maybe there's some tangential connection in the lineage that they don't remember. I have no idea. But I had a really tough, I think with this one, and I think that's part of the reason why, one of the things that makes it a good ghost story is I couldn't exactly pinpoint what it was. And I kind of like that I couldn't.
Yeah.
What about you?
So I think by intent, we're supposed to be left wondering about it. To make it a good ghost story, right? You got to have the unknown factor.
Mm-hmm.
But my thoughts on who it is more, I think it's specifically just the two sisters, because they fought over, gosh, words are not coming to me well tonight. They fought over ownership of the house, possession. That's what I was thinking. They fought over possession of the house, and then one of the very first things the house communicates to them is, in sort, a possession of the house. They wanted Eleanor to come home.
Yeah, and to me, I interpret that a different way, and that's why I thought the child specifically is because it was like, I want to go home, and like, I get that like Miss Montague gives us the background of, oh, that's just what ghosts like how they like to talk is they like to repeat things, but the things that it was repeating were so simple that it felt kind of childish, like, I just want home, I don't want to be alone, I want to go home, like type of thing. And it was just pulling in the thing that it connected with the most, the naivete of Eleanor. So that and the fact that it went by a nickname like Nell or Nellie, like that just it put kid in my head,
Yeah.
So that was like that's kind of where I went. But I do actually agree with Stormreed on this. Is there was a lot of build up to this house, and there wasn't really all that much that happened. But I think that's kind of what makes this as chilling as it is because it's something that you could realistically see people experiencing. Like it's just enough to have like an entire town blow it out of proportion. Especially again, remember this is in the context of like written in the 50s and it's from people in the early 20th century.
Yep.
So if you put it in that context, it's the kind of thing that would freak enough people out to like cause a whole town to basically turn into like a ghost town that tells everybody to fuck off.
Yeah, gosh, that first paranormal activity scene that hit with the knocking on the doors and the thing trying to get in the room. Man, I picked the perfect time to listen to that because it was 4 a.m. and I was getting ready for work and nobody else was awake and my house was completely dark. And I had to walk outside in the complete darkness, and like the whole ambience of my house at 4 a.m. was like really lending the spook factor to that scene. And that moment I was like, yep, I love this book. This is awesome. And then it never really grew from there. But
And honestly, it's the fact that it never went really beyond that made me lean towards the kid. Like the child haunting is just because it was a lot less malicious than I was expecting. But again, I'm wondering how much of that is us just being desensitized to like horror being so in our face nowadays. Like
Yeah.
What does horror look like now? Like Saw or
Yeah.
Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street. Like they're things that are really in your face and you're expecting a lot when we know most of the stuff we know about paranormal activity even is way up in your face. Or Blair Witch style, that's a good way to put it. It's much gorier. And this just wasn't that. It was just enough to be like, we can't quite explain what's going on here. And well, we'll get to the ending later, which is really what ties it together as being truly, but that's what really drives it home as being enough to, scare people away, but it's not in your face. And that's what my first impression was about, is it just wasn't what I was expecting because it's a lot more subtly played, but I thought the pieces that it did have were very powerful. And that was without the dark and spooky house, so I can only imagine how much better that was waking up and listening it to then.
Yeah.
All right, Stormy, thank you for bringing that up. I really do want to talk to that. What did you think about the architecture of the house and the role it played?
Yeah, I thought it was a cool aspect. I like the whole getting turned around feature, like thinking you're at the front of the house but you're actually at the back. The fact that they had the one long hallway and then everything else had no hallways. It was just you go through rooms to get where you wanted to go. That seems pretty cool. And I kind of wish that I could go live in a house like that because it sounds dope, like a maze. Um, the unlevel floor thing is unrealistic, though. I bought, and not didn't I didn't buy. I visited a house that I wanted to buy five-ish years ago, and that house was unlevel, not enough to see, but enough to feel, and um, it was extremely noticeable. Like an unlevel floor isn't something you just gloss over. Like you notice.
Well, Dr. Montague does say when he mentions that is they're off by fractions of an inch. It's not like that much, but it's just enough. And the way I imagined it is that those fractions of an inch off weren't all in the same direction, because our brains are actually really good at noticing that stuff when, like, if it's slanting to one side, you're going to notice. But if things balance each other out, like going down, your brain will correct for that stuff. And the thing is, the more corrections your brain has to make, it gets tired and it will start throwing out optical illusions. Like that actually is a psychological phenomena that happens. Um,
Yeah, what I mean though is like your brain makes those connections and adjusts over time. When I stepped into the unlevel house, I went, "Oh, geez, the floor is unlevel." Like you notice right away.
yeah, but my guess is when you went in there, was it all unlevel in roughly one direction?
It doesn't matter. It was my first step.
Does matter. Optically speaking, if it's all in one direction, your brain is going to process that all in one direction. But if you're seeing things that are unlevel in different directions, sometimes your brain is like,
Yeah,
oh, these kind of,
I'm not saying optically. I'm saying I stepped in and my
oh, the
foot
feeling of
told
it.
me it
Okay.
was unlevel.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to like how it's hard to know without having stepped in the house that you didn't and knowing like how off it was, because tiny little differences are hard for our brain to process. I'm trying to think about the effect that I learned about when I was in class specifically. Um, when it comes to balance in particular. I should know this because one of my professors was actually doing research on this. But so it is possible for that to happen, but I do agree that's probably the least likely to be an issue. But expectation that we have of a house doing certain things being subverted definitely can mess with the mind. And you have to also think about it back in the day when, you know, like houses in a certain style, you would expect very specific things, where there's so many architectural styles out there now. Yeah, we print form houses, but we print form houses in different neighborhoods with different styles. But they're coming out of the Victorian area where basically every house was the same. Like there was some architectural stuff that was the same no matter where you went. And if you're expecting those things and it doesn't happen, your brain does try to correct for that stuff. And it's kind of amazing how we, as humans, like habitually fall into that trap, and our brains just try to correct it because that's all we know. And I thought that was a really smart use of architecture to lend, again, that skepticism about what's really going on. Kind of let your guard down, be like, oh, they're gonna, you know, I'm going to try and explain away anything that happens to them. And then there are things that she specifically threw out that would contradict that you couldn't explain away necessarily. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I definitely liked the non-square rooms aspect. That seems cool.
Yeah, right? Like just a little bit off. Like, so it kind of looks square, but it's not. It's kind of like that optical illusion where it's the hallway, which one of these pictures is bigger.
Yeah.
But they're really the same size. I can't, like, imagining living in that when you're used to square rooms. For my job, I inspect a lot of houses, and I've actually like been in a number of unconventional room types, and it's kind of surprising how weird it feels in those rooms. And those were the ones that were noticeably different. So I wonder what it'd be like being in one of those rooms that are just, keep you feeling off kilter even when you're trying to sleep.
Yeah.
If you really want to throw people off, is bed a little bit on wrong angle, or that's one thing I legitimately did wonder, is like, is it the furniture too, or is it just the house?
It'd be funny to put like a tiny vibrator in the floor so that like you could feel it, but you thought it was just like a radiator or something, but over time it shifted your bed away from the wall or something.
Oh,
So Storm Reed and Via Strag are talking about I forget the maid lady's name. Sandor. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I gotta see Dune still. Came
that one
out.
just
I'm
came out.
excited. I gotta go see it. AJ says that you gotta go to the theater and see it, and that it's a theater-worthy experience.
Duly noted and passed on.
Yeah. Anyway, do you remember the name of the maid lady?
I'm trying to remember. I just remember her being arguably the most annoying character.
Well, my question about her is Mrs. Dudley. Yeah, that sounds right. Do you think the schedule was because of Hill House or just because of how she is as a person?
My guess is it was probably a little column A, a little column B. Like typically, like people who run houses are very on the dot about stuff, but they'll adjust to where they are for what, and then make it a regimen. I have to imagine it was one of those things where you move into you go into a house, and if something works and works consistently, you stay consistent.
Yeah.
you know, and you do that because it's the only thing that is not off kilter. you know,
Yeah.
and As Stormmeat said, everything else is inconsistent, but not the food service. No, I think that was mostly her, but it was probably informed by an adjustment to Hill House. That's my guess.
Yeah. I think what K Brock said about getting her crap done and get the heck out of Dodge is exactly it. I
Yep.
think she is unwilling to vary from the schedule so that she can't accidentally end up still there at nighttime. And
Yeah.
she's so adamant about not being there at nighttime that she is unwilling to change any aspect of it.
Yep, don't want to accidentally be in after dark at all. And can't say I blame her. Honestly, I did at one point wonder, like, as the only character who like gets to leave on a regular basis, like what's it like going in and out of that house over and over again? Like is it like you when you went to that one house where you're like she just notices it all re-notices it because she's constantly resetting when she leaves, or is it one of those things that is is it just that subtle where you don't outright notice it, which can happen, but it would have to be ridiculously precise.
Even better, does she ever go around going, "Hey, wait a minute, why is that door open? Must need oiling." Because they all shut.
Oh man. So one of the things I want to talk about is what were your thoughts on uh Theodora? Like specifically, we haven't really touched on her much yet.
Yeah, I think Theodore was to me somewhat relatable because it feels like her coping mechanisms for the events were kind of how I would handle things, right? Like she makes bad jokes about it and laughs it off. And that feels like what I would do in that situation. I'd be like, oh, yeah, no big deal. Just some lunatic banging on our door trying to get in here so they can kill us. It's barely even woke me up. Yeah.
No, I would tend to agree. Like I think she was probably the most relatable character because I don't she took things in stride for the most part. She was vulnerable enough to be scared that first encounter. Like I thought there was going to be more because she was the one who was like freaking out and like kind of rocking back and forth. I don't think I'd be doing that aspect of it, but like she was vulnerable enough to show fear, but not so much, but she had a way to cope with it, like you said. And she was the only one who used like a fairly relatable way. Like she wasn't overly intellectual. She didn't lean into believing it. She wasn't maybe overly whimsical about it like Eleanor was. And the only other one who comes off even remotely close to that would maybe be Luke, but I don't know. Luke was of the characters I thought the most forgettable.
Yeah. Luke
Yeah.
Luke seemed to be there to exist for strife between Theodora and Eleanor.
Yeah, I mean, there are other ways that the contention could have been put in there, but again, thinking about the context of when this was written, I'm not surprised that there was a love triangle thing kind of going on a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, foil the ladies. It's like he was there and there was a connection to the house that, like, at first I kind of, when they set him up as like the heir to the house once somebody died, I thought he was going to start murdering people, honestly. Like I thought maybe he'd be there to murder people, just so that he can like claim the house for his own or something like that. Uh but I don't know. He was probably the weakest character in my opinion, and and I didn't really realize that until I started thinking about like Theodora and Eleanor and their relationship and like how much if I had to like a character in this, Theodora was probably my favorite in a cast of, you know, not particularly deep characters, but
Yeah.
again, didn't need to be. But like, I'm not sure what Stormy is saying. Eleanor want to be her what? Be her what?
What in the what?
What? Um,
Well, what do you think about the doctor and his wife?
they were like, I'm I'm kind of surprised. Like as I read, I was like, why are these two a couple? Like that, that was like my immediate takeaway from that. I'm like, and it didn't even fall into like the typical trope of like the husband and wife who've been together so long and they hate each other. And I was just like, these two just seem so completely and irredeemably incompatible, aside from their or like slight sharing of interest in the paranormal.
Yeah.
I honestly found their interactions somewhat humorous. Like I thought that kind of actually took away from the tension a little bit with me. Uh, yeah, I mean, she was a vehicle for being able to communicate with the spirits. Like they needed somebody to come in later because you don't want to do that too soon. And you've already set up Eleanor and Luke and Theodora to be single. So how do you bring somebody else in? Either the doctor calls somebody in, or you bring somebody with a reason, who I guess would be a wife.
Yeah.
Henpecked, that's a good word for that. B.S. Drake throwing in some extra drama there, and I did kind of get that vibe is that driver might have been doing a little more just driving.
Heyo. So I really thought that the doctor was going to be more like his wife than what he turned out to be. Cause like she came in with a plan. She was like, "Yo, let's do this bullshit thing. Let's talk to these guys. Let's stay up all night and see what's gonna happen." And the doctor was like, "Take notes in the morning."
Well, I mean, he was initially, I kind of had the same thought, especially when Eleanor was talking about how she was written to about like the scientific study and stuff like that. But he was more of like an observational studier, it seemed like. And I don't mind that he was laid back. I am glad that they brought somebody in who did have a plan. But I think it was intentional that, yeah, she was a participator and investigator. Like despite him starting this, she was definitely the one who would be on Ghost Hunters. For sure. you know, and I'm glad that somebody like that got brought in. It was just a weird dynamic between the two of them, and it just felt really unbelievable that they were married. Yes, I guess shared purpose, K Rock. That's a good point. Maybe very different tactics, but like that was probably the part where I don't know. At that point, why don't you just have him call a medium rather than like force her to be his wife? Like I didn't really see the point of that unless the humor was intentional, because I mostly found myself giggling at their interactions. Just like that's dumb.
I did like the part where Eleanor went a little bananas at the end and went banging on everybody's door. and banged on the nursery door, and the wife was just like, "Yeah, come in. I'm not gonna come out, but you can come in."
Yeah,
It's like, well, I'm not
possibly.
stupid.
Yeah, and I
You
just,
are loved.
it's kind of ironic that I went into that book not expecting, and it's actually one of the reasons why I chose the ghost story that I did. Granted, I chose it kind of haphazardly, but I chose one with a little bit of humor because I was not expecting there to be humor in this, and there, and there was, and I just wasn't expecting that because I'm not used to that in most ghost stories that aren't like outright jokes, you know. And I don't know, I didn't see it as intentional when I initially read the book, but upon further thinking, it might have been. But I do also agree. I like that little went off the deep end at the very end of the book. But what I especially like is that it led to the ending, which I would like to talk about now.
Yeah, real quick. Storm, lovers meet at journey's end was the line.
Stories end when lovers meet, maybe, or oh no, Adam, you got it. Never mind. I was reading off what V.S. Drake said. So yeah, what were your thoughts on of the ending and demise of Eleanor?
Yeah. Um, I was. I think somebody already said it about it kind of being rushed. Yeah, I felt like the book rushed to the end at that point, is what V.S. Drake said. After the wife got there. Um, I feel like it's hard to tell exactly when or even if Eleanor was really possessed, um, based on her own personality trait of fanciful imagining. I I mean, she's like you already said, she's the obvious choice for possession. So I think the author did a good job picking her for that role. Um, the one thing I didn't understand about her possession was the whole library bit. Like she didn't want to go in the library, and then when she was possessed, she went in the library. Um, maybe you have insight on that in a second here, but I I liked the manifestation of she essentially did everything that had happened to them herself. I thought that was kind of cool. Um, I liked the part where she was driving up to the tree where she had that second of, wait, what am I doing? Like it released her for that very last second, just so it was her that drove into the tree and not the ghost. It's like, oh, I didn't do it. I mean, I let go, right? But that also kind of leads credence to the thought of maybe she wasn't possessed, maybe it was just she was going a little crazy from all of the happenings in the house, and at the last second she had reservations about what she was doing and pulled back. Um, I was a little torn about it, but I don't know. What were your thoughts?
Um, I thought it followed thematically. It wasn't necessarily my favorite ending, but I appreciated that it followed thematically with this idea of it being subtle and not in your face. Like even with that crash at the ending, that little let go throws just enough skepticism in there at the end to be like, was she actually possessed or not? Was this, did her brain have time to reorient itself outside of the house? You know, as far as the library, I had two theories on that, and I had one paranormal, one scientific. Paranormal theory, that's where something terrible went down in the house. That was the focal point of the possession. And being drawn to it makes sense because once you're possessed, you go to the point of power and then move on from there. Scientific theory, they were smelling some noxious gas or something that was throwing them all for a loop that's coming up through the library, or something rotting in there that's like, maybe some black mold or some mushrooms or something. Something's in the air, and that's what's causing the smell is causing the hallucinations, And again, I think that was actually purposeful, is that it wasn't explored to leave just
none.
the skepticism.
Sorry.
Or none.
In the walls.
It's the most common form.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, K-Brock actually makes a good point, though, is that she may have been in tune with the house. She seemed to be in tune with the house, but wasn't allowed in there to that point until she was possessed. And that would make sense if that's a point of power or a place that could be, like when you see a lot of like ghost stories, there's an object or a place or something that needs to be exorcised or destroyed in order to return the whatever it is to normal, or to destroy the ghost. And it makes sense that that would be protected by the ghost until it knew it was safe, i.e. having possessed the person. But the ending, I do want to note, I thought made sense because of what came up when they were on that Ouija board knockoff thing. I can't remember what it was called, but it kept saying home, I want to go home, and there were themes about merging with the home, like it wanted people to stay there with it. And when it realized it couldn't keep them there physically, you kill them, so the spirit is either released or bound to that point.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing that may very well, when you asked about who I think was haunting the mansion, the other theory I have is that it's not just the family, but everybody that they've killed, or that has died from staying in the house, because there was somebody else who was there before who was killed. Like, I think his horse ran into a tree or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the whole area is haunted by everyone that's been killed by those that possessed Hill House.
Just like Eleanor.
Planchette, that's the word. Thank you, K-Brock.
The thing they use to write to the ghosts and stuff.
Yeah. I thought it was actually kind of interesting. Like, it was a little takeaway, but like, it was a little historical, like, branch, but I thought it was interesting hearing about the different ways that people basically used to communicate with spirits, like including ones that they used like a child's toy with a wheel, like a wheeled toy or something like that, to point to the letters.
Though what was up with them referring to the planchette like it was a person?
That was a little weird. I thought maybe by treating the object like it was like the spirit was inhabiting it, like maybe that is meant to create like a sense of connection. Like, they even talk about Hill House as a living thing, like from the very beginning. So objects they're anthropomorphized to an extent, like just throughout the book. So yeah, maybe K-Brock, like K-Brock said, is that maybe it's an entity in and of itself. And V.S. Drake thought Planchette was a spirit that lives in the object. I'm assuming you meant lives and not loves in the object. Maybe, who knows?
Gets a little kinky in the little triangular piece of wood.
Well, I just Googled it, and a planchette actually does it. Like, it is an object, like, but there may have been a spirit in it that lives and loves in the objects. So, well, the planchette is actually just the thing that they push on over the Ouija board. Like, it's the pointing thing. It's typically a piece of wood that has like a cutout or a piece of glass, and that's what hovers over the letter so that there's no ambiguity about what letter you're focusing on.
Yeah. I think the planchette in the story it's that thing with a pencil dangling over it. So when it moves, it draws something on top of the planchette.
Well, that's either a plumb bob or a dowsing rod, or a dowsing plumb.
So that's how they described it in the book, is they were writing to the ghost.
No, I guess that could be. I don't know. That was a little vague, and I kind of agree with Stormy. It was a bit meandering the way they were talking about it, especially to get something vague out of it. But it, beyond learning the history, I didn't pay that much attention to that, honestly, just because, again, it wasn't that important.
Yeah.
It
was just a curiosity that threw me off. That it was like they were referencing it as a thing, like a person, not a thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. It was a bit weird to read around at the end, but I also slightly attribute that to just Miss Montague's personality in general. You know.
Shall we get into the closing thoughts?
Yeah, and we can just basically go off what V.S. Drake said. What do we think of the book overall? Was a hit or a miss? As a ghost story, I thought it was a hit because it was one that was, I thought, done reasonably well. There was just enough little creepy moments to actually be creepy, you know, because I've read plenty of ghost stories that just aren't, you know.
Yeah.
It actually had turned me off to ghost stories and horror books in general for a very long time. I didn't get anything out of them, like, and I got something out of this, so I would consider that a hit. Do I think it's for everybody? Absolutely not. If you want an in-your-face type of like horror or ghost story, this is not it whatsoever. Like, that's just not how it plays. But it's unique. The characters were set up, I thought, pretty well to do what they were meant to do. And I personally enjoyed it, but if I recommended it to anybody, I would recommend doing it when you're in the mood for a ghost story and you're ready to dedicate yourself to just reading that, you know, not doing other stuff. Like, that's how I'd recommend it. But I definitely see why it is touted as one of the best ghost stories written in the modern era. It's just unique enough. I thought most of it was well written. It has its flaws, but
Yeah.
V.S. Drake, perfect. I thought it was a good ghost story, but it's not a true horror story. Because ghost stories don't have to be horror. They are in the horror genre, but they don't have to be scream your pants off. They're just meant to be creepy or chilling. You know, they can be creepy or chilling and still be really good. And I thought it did that effectively.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think it was a great ghost story. I would have liked to see more escalation from that first haunting scene. The way that one hit me was just like, yes. Mm-hmm. And I felt like the rest of the scenes were more confusing and less ghosty. So meh. The end scene was kind of cool with Eleanor's freak out. I would have liked to. really curious about what's in the top of the tower because she made it there and then it was locked and never went in. It would have been cool to like get in there and find a skeleton or something, you know. Be kind of cool, but um, I I like VS Drake just said, I would have liked it to be a little bit longer, maybe fleshed more things out, maybe gotten a little deeper on some of the history on the house. It would have been cool if they could find some things about past residences more than what they, briefly did with the couple of books and stuff. Um, and I would have, I thought it would have been cool if we actually got an identity of the ghost that was haunting it. But overall, I really liked the writing style. I thought the characters were varied in their voices, which is not something you always get from authors. A lot of authors have the tendency to write characters kind of similar with a couple of key differences. Um, so yeah, I liked it, but would have liked more of it.
Yeah, I possibly could have done more, but the other thing is I would worry about if it's one of those things where, yeah, it would be nice if there's more of it, but if you put more in there, do you start to destabilize what was good about it before? And that's a tough line to ride, maybe. But I think K Brock makes a good point. Sometimes it's more creepy to leave stuff to your imagination. I think that actually is one of the things that can make a ghost story powerful is letting your own imagination run wild. Like that's why you tell them around campfires is right before you go to bed, you're supposed to creep people out before they go to bed, so that like the dreams can really do the real work.
Yeah.
I mean, it even happens in the story itself. It creeps them out, and then Eleanor starts having those dreams, and those are some of the. It's probably the only other like truly really creepy part that happens after that first encounter, in my opinion, and yeah, it might have been nice if it ramped up a little bit more, but I think that as a ghost story, it's a nice, unique one. So Stormweed was surprised when it ended. I was not that surprised, honestly, but I can see why it would be surprising because it does wrap up in a hurry, like V.S. Drake said.
I was surprised they didn't last longer. Like especially like
Well, the only one who didn't last longer was Eleanor. The rest of them were supposed to stay there.
well they left,
Yeah,
They talk about how the doctor said the house has had tenants over the years, but none of them have stayed for more than a few days to a week, and they stayed a week.
true. I mean, the intent was to stay longer, but then the crash. So, but tis, V.S. Drake, but tis.
I will say this though, like the way Eleanor was introduced to the story, I thought this was going to be one of those stories where it jumps perspective to perspective, but it pretty much just stuck with Eleanor the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
My initial thought was, okay, no matter what Eleanor says, you got to take it with a grain of salt because it's Eleanor. She lets her mind wander. She lets her mind imagine things. So if she says something happened, maybe it didn't really happen because it's Eleanor. But then we only saw her perspective for the rest of the book. So I was like, oh, well, okay.
K Brock, I had the same thought. In the end, they thought they'd saved her, and she dies, so the house wins. I had that same thought, and that's why I wasn't too disappointed with the ending. Anyways, I think it's about time we wrap up for the night. I believe we have our winner for our book, our next book. What do we have coming up for our next show, though, Adam? And I'll let him know the winner
Yeah,
for the
I've
one.
I've actually got them both queued up here.
Oh, you do? All right.
Yep. So their next show is Shorefall by Robert Bennett. That's for November 6th. And then 2 weeks after that, on November 20th, we'll be doing Stormfront by Jim Butcher.
That's right. So it's our sequels week, the first week, and our redemption week, the second week. So those are the winners for those votes. Shorefall was the sequel to Storm Power. Huh?
Foundry Side?
Oh, Foundry Side. Yeah. I got those two mixed up the first time too. So yeah, it's our follow-up to Foundry Side, and Stormfront was one of the books that had originally received votes previously and didn't make it. So it got its second chance and won. Keep in mind that the first episode of our second year doing this is our next show.
Yes.
So thank you all for supporting that. And then for December, we're just going to go back to the original formula. We're still figuring out exactly how many weeks we'll be doing that month with the holiday schedule. We may only end up doing one book that month. We might be able to squeeze in two. We're, again, still figuring that out. We'll keep you posted. But for now, we are just going to go back to, if you have any recommendations, let us know. Otherwise, we will pull from our pretty extensive list at this point. And then, we're already close to the new year. It has gone fast. But why don't we get into our plugs for the night?
Yeah, so below the video, you'll find a bunch of links. Let's talk about those real quick. Patreon is Patreon. Give us money, and we'll give you options that you don't normally have as a free user, like telling us what to read. We post a book vote on Patreon. Our patrons can vote, and then the winner of that vote is how we select our next book. Although anybody can suggest a book at any time, and we'll try and throw that up on the vote list. YouTube is below Patreon, or next to, depending on how big your screen is. I believe it's next to. I don't know. We'll mess with it later. YouTube is where we post all of our videos, including these streams, past and current, as well as our podcast and some book reviews, some other stuff. Check it out. Next is Twitter and Facebook, our socials. Facebook is at the DMs table. Twitter is at DMs table. We post about the 800's mostly right now, but anything else that we're doing, we're going to post on there. So if you want to know what we're up to, follow us, and then you'll hear about it because you'll be following us. And finally, I'd like to talk to you about Discord. We have a Discord chat. The Discord doesn't just talk about books; it talks about all things nerdy. An active chat right now on Discord is our 3D printing chat. Some of our members are really into the 3D printing world, and they like to share their experiences and the cool designs that they're up to. So that's just an example of what you'd find on our Discord, not just books, although we do talk about books. This week especially, we were talking a little bit about these books, some other books. Dune made it out there briefly. But yeah, if you want to talk with a bunch of nerds, hit us up on our socials, and we'll give you the link to our Discord, and you can join us. We also do the reminders on Discord too. So if you need a schedule, it's on Discord.
Yeah, it's probably the best way to get like the on the moment updates on that sort of thing if you need extra reminders, because everybody gets added for those if you're on the Discord. Also, we are looking to do, per the suggestion of some of you, a list of our favorite books for the year. What we will probably be doing for that is recording that separately, releasing it to our Patreon viewers initially, and slowly, depending on your tier, then slowly releasing it publicly. So if you want to get to view that right as we create our list, you'll have to follow that link that Adam just gave you for our Discord. And if you have any other ideas for content that you would like to see, please let us know, because we'd love to, have your thoughts on the types of stuff that you would not only want to see, but maybe be willing to help support us to see. And we thank you, and legitimately thank you for those ideas, and thank you once again for helping us make this happen for a year. I mean, I know that we would probably be doing it anyways, but it's a lot easier and a lot more fun. When we have an active chat like we did tonight. So, round of applause to 1 year for our Discord chat. Yeah, that's our Twitch chat. Yay!
That's the oldest bad round of applause joke there is. This one.
All of you here tonight, and all of those who missed tonight, who have been here in the past, you guys are awesome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for joining us and providing your perspective to the books. So that's what makes it interesting, is hearing about not only how we took the books, but how everybody else thought the books were, and getting some insights on things that we might have missed and stuff like that. So it's really cool to hear.
Calling us out when we're dead wrong or can't remember names, or
yeah, it's cool to hear that stuff. but yeah, especially thank you tonight for joining us, because you're watching us right now. So we're speaking to you. Thank you for joining us.
See you next book, and next year, or next season.
Next season. Let's go with next season. I like that.
Yeah, next season.